Greg.
What is it?
I need to erase a lot of my emails. Because North Korean hackers.
Calm down. Catch your breath. We deal with this all the time here in the IT department. So you're worried that hackers are going to make some of your internal emails public?
This morning, you know the little blue wheel that spins and spins while you're waiting for the new cat video to load?
Yes, we call that the little blue endlessly spinning wheel.
Yeah. Well, today, inside of it, I briefly glimpsed the face of Kim Jong-un. He was staring at me.
You sure it wasn't just the Eye of Mordor? Because we're getting a lot of that ever since they merged with Comcast.
No, it was him. He's coming to get my emails, Greg.
Well, let's see how bad a problem this is. Give me a word to search for, and I'll find the email.
Okay, chump wagon.
One word?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here it is. Oh, I remember this one. You sent it to me, and you called Garrison Keillor.
Yeah.
Calm down. Nobody's listening. Look, you also called him a chundermuffin and a plague boil.
Greg, you have to erase it. If he ever sees it, I'm totally finished in public broadcasting.
Yeah, this is what's known in my business as FIYS.
What's that?
Forget it, you're screwed. Look, it's already stored in several locations.
Then you have to destroy those other locations.
That's not as easy as it sounds.
Crash the moon into the earth, destroy all life as we know it. We'll just start over in a new dimension in the multiverse.
You might be overreacting a little. This is a slightly awkward situation, but it's not a reason to take drastic measures. Maybe the big takeaway is, don't send emails calling people horrible names.
Yeah, but what fun is that?
Or you could continue being an idiot who occasionally needs to destroy the solar system.
Today on the Scramble, the fallout from the Sony hack, 6 kinds of religious pilgrimage, and a lawsuit against a gun company. And now he says all of his embarrassing emails were typed by his cordless mouse. Colin McEnroe.
It's true. We just got them, but I go home at night and it writes its own emails. They're not from me. So we're going to talk about the Sony hack in the second segment here. A lot of interesting questions, first of all, about how this came about, but also about how news organizations make decisions about whether to use material like this, material that is essentially kind of tainted because of its pirated status, but not necessarily unimportant or useless. I also did not realize the Eye of Mordor had merged with Comcast. That may be worth a segment on a future show as well. And then towards the end of the show today, we'll be, as sort of part of the sad second anniversary of the Newtown shooting, which was yesterday, we'll be talking specifically about a lawsuit, an unusual kind of lawsuit. Lawsuits against gun manufacturers are very difficult to file, especially after 2004, but we'll talk about a lawsuit in connection with that is being filed. So, but we're going to begin with Bruce Feiler. We've had him on this show before. We liked him so much. We wanted him to come back, especially because he's hosting the PBS miniseries Sacred Journeys, which premieres tomorrow night here at on CPTV at 9 p.m. This is a series of 6 documentaries about pilgrimages, sacred pilgrimages of the type from around the world, from many different continents, but they all kind of have a common thread. First of all, Bruce Feiler, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you, Colin.
So first of all, tell us how it was that you in particular decided, or how is it that you come to be the person who's guiding us through these pilgrimages? Why Bruce Feiler?
Well, as you know, I've spent many of the last 20 years going on religious adventures of this type. My book, Walking the Bible, in which I retraced the 5 books through 5 different countries in the Middle East, was published in 2001, and that also became a 3-hour series on PBS a few years after that. And I wrote Abraham and Where God Was Born, and a series of books in this space. And about 5 years ago, PBS came to me and asked me if I would make a show about pilgrimage. And my initial reaction was actually hesitant. I said, well, I didn't want to make a series of Wikipedia entries about, these are strange journeys that strange people go on in strange places. I didn't want the whole thing to be other and distant, if you will. But what I was interested in, and what I said to them was, what do you hear most in religious circles these days? You hear, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. Like I'm on a journey of some kind. Like everybody is seeking something. And I said, if we made a series that whatever journey people are on, they can see themselves reflected in the journeys that they see in this, on the screen on PBS, well, that's something that's perhaps a greater and more difficult challenge, but something I'd be interested in.
One thing it seemed as though I was sort of looking for common threads running through these stories, and these stories do span from India to Africa to Lourdes in France to Shikoku in Japan. I was looking for, and I'm sure you were too, looking for sort of common threads among these pilgrims. It seemed as though a lot of people were trying to get through some transition. It could be a relatively simple one, like two medical students about to become doctors or something, just sort of wondering, what it means to have chosen this profession, to somebody trying to get over a Muslim, trying to get over who's been through a divorce. It seemed time after time there was some kind of transition that was playing out against the backdrop of this pilgrimage.
I think that's exactly right, and that's very insightful on your part. I would say, just to sort of set the stage here, okay, so this was 5 years in the making that it was a year to find the pilgrims, a year to figure out which pilgrimages we wanted to do, et cetera. And then last year, basically in the course of 12 months, I went on 6 of these pilgrimages. You mentioned India, went to Lourdes with 40 wounded warriors from Iraq and Afghanistan. There, we did go on the Hajj back to Africa with African Americans reclaiming their tribal roots. There's an hour on the Jesus Trail and the Jewish pilgrimage during Sukkot. And I think that what's really going on from my point of view is that organized religion is more threatened than ever, as we all know and we hear about all the time, right? Membership, attendance, even the number of people who define themselves as religious, all those numbers are going down and have been going down for quite a while. And yet pilgrimage is up, and not just up, surging. The UN held its first ever World Congress on pilgrimage in September in Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And they released a study at that time that a third of all tourists in the world are pilgrims. And this is not like some hype organization. This is the UN, pegged this number at 330 million people a year. That's basically 1 million people a day going on what they talk about as spiritual travel. And I think you're exactly right that people tend to do it in moments of transition, whether they're young people graduating from some school and heading into their lives. People do it in times of loss. So they lose a job, or they lose a parent, or God forbid lose a child. Divorce, you mentioned somebody during the Hajj has a divorce. A lot of retirees do it, sort of about to begin the final act in their lives. And I think that when these things are difficult and they happen, that they bring out, their suffering is involved, and they put you in this dislocation. And of course, if you look at the great religious narratives, whether it's the biblical narrative or the Buddhist narrative or the Hindu narrative, they also involve people leaving the civilized world, going into the wilderness of some kind, having a transformational experience, and then coming back and sharing that with people in the civilized world. So the sort of the religious narratives here tend to sync up with the individual narratives of the pilgrims.
Another thing that intrigued me was that so often there seemed to be this very interesting collision between the imperfections of the body and the fallibility of the body and the unpredictability of the body with that notion of immutable spirit, of eternal religious presence emanating from some particular site. So, you really see it with the Wounded Warriors, obviously, going to Lourdes, but it's sort of there in some of the other ones, too. And the Japanese one, it's a 700-mile trek around this island. You have this retired Marine who didn't make it the first time and is trying to go back, and he's a man who kind of looks like he's kind of out of shape, and a lot of the conversation is really sort of about my body. Can my body do this? And that's a hard one, that 700-mile trek. It's over very difficult terrain. In Lourdes, there isn't like so much distance to traverse, but you have these people whose bodies are broken and who are there. It feels like there's something about that. Can I get my physical body to do something it doesn't necessarily automatically want to do or be able to do, and in connection with this sort of other, much more eternal question?
First of all, you're very good. It's great to be with you. And I would say that's exactly right. Think about your life. Think about all of our lives. I'm a cancer survivor and went through 6 years ago quite a physical ordeal, and we know in our own lives that when we're comfortable, when we're fat and happy, when we got money in our pocket and it's the holiday season and we're surrounded by joy and family, we're on top of the world. It's in those moments that perhaps we are less sensitive to others and less open to other ideas or maybe someone or something higher. But sure enough, in moments of loss, whether it's the loss of a loved one, whether we physically fail in some capacity, or whether we suffer in any way. It's in those moments that we reach out to others, and there are these sort of windows, if you will. These kind of life opens up a little bit, and these other possibilities enter into our consciousness, and that we know from life. I mean, I've spent a lot of my life kind of looking at meaning, what it means to live a meaningful life. And these moments of breakthrough often occur in these moments of pain and suffering. And so therefore, it's something about these journeys that it is difficult. You're going to a foreign country. You're in different time zones. The accommodations aren't always great. The food is sometimes difficult. But yet that experience, to a certain extent, reinforces the emotional and spiritual seeking that we're under. And yes, I think pilgrimages are sort of forcing on you these moments when you will be open to change.
You sort of also wonder whether at some Jungian level this is just kind of imprinted on us, that we want to do something like this, or that with the need to do something like this. Because you could look at these 6 journeys, these 6 pilgrimages, and they really are kind of different in some ways and similar in others. But you could and the movie Wild is coming out right now based on Cheryl Strayed's book. I just listened to a Third Coast audio thing about the Appalachian Trail, my millionth thing about the Appalachian Trail. And people do these things sometimes for what seem to be a little bit more temporal or secular reasons, sometimes for overtly religious reasons. But you kind of wonder, if Joseph Campbell were still around, whether he'd be saying, well, all of our myths just have that, right?
Well, there's no doubt that as long as humans have walked, they've walked to get closer to their gods, right? So Buddhists have them, Hindus have them, Zoroastrians have them, Jews, Christians, and Muslims all have them. The word for human being in Tibetan is goer, one who goes, right? The Buddha said, if you die during a pilgrimage, you will go to a higher level of enlightenment. So absolutely, this is kind of core to the human experience, but I think that we've almost forgotten to a certain extent that this is the way the religious journey goes. I mean, I'm going to date myself with this story, but I grew up in the 60s and 70s, right? And to me, when I was growing up, to believe in God, right, to be a believer, to someone engage these questions, it always seemed to me that God was like that star on the floor where Johnny Carson used to come out and stand. Like, you were either on that star or you were off that star. You either believed in God or you didn't believe in God, right? You either were religious or not. Well, that we now know that is a very outdated and unrealistic expectation. Everybody's moving in some capacity, right? They go through periods of belief. They go through periods of doubt. They seek, they question, they retreat, okay? In this moment, you're not so interested. In this moment, you're very interested. And so we've misunderstood religion as being a fixed thing. In fact, it's a moving thing. And you combine that with the core human act, right? And the thing that distinguishes humans from our ancestors is the idea that we can walk, is that we are upright and we are moving. So I think that the idea that we should almost in a way reconsider religion less as going to a building at the time the building tells us to show up, and we sit passively in a pew and we listen to someone lecture at us from a mountain from a book that's been closed for thousands of years. Nothing about that is the way humans live today, right? What is the way humans encounter the world today? Answer, the Google box, right? It's that search box. Search is how we get information, and increasingly search is how we experience religion too.
This, by the way, will lead very nicely into tomorrow's show. We've decided to re-air a full-hour interview with Thomas More I did a while back about his book, Religion of One's Own. It's coming out in paperback, exactly what Bruce Feiler is talking about right now. By the way, we're talking about Bruce Feiler's series on Sacred Journeys, which premieres tomorrow night on CPTV at 9. So that's an interesting point, that the notion of religion is maybe a little bit more fungible and elastic than we sometimes make it seem or allow it to seem. And it seems to me that another thing in this series is that a lot of terms are more fungible and elastic than we make them seem. And I think in particular the word healing. Okay, so you've got a lot of people are looking for healing on these journeys. It's one of the things that gets people out there on their feet walking towards these places. But, when you go with the wounded warriors to Lourdes, so it would be naive, and I think people aren't, naive to expect a miraculous healing for a whole group of wounded warriors, of ex-military people who have lost legs, and they're just not going to get their legs back going there. But and not all of them are, as you suggest, deeply religious in any conventional sense. But they're all there. They didn't not go to Lourdes. So tell us what you saw in their states of mind.
It's amazing, Colin. It really is. incredible. It's never been seen on television before. It took us a year to get permission from the Pentagon to even go on this trip. Okay, so 40 wounded warriors. They go, they're in wheelchairs, some are in hospital gurneys, and they go to Lourdes in southwest France. Now, some of these pilgrims, like we've been talking about, the Hajj and the Jesus Trail, these are going in the footsteps of places where prophets walked hundreds or thousands of years ago. This is totally different, Lourdes, right? This is in 1858. A 14-year-old peasant girl has multiple encounters with the Virgin Mary, and up pops this shrine that now is the second most popular after the Vatican. 4 million people a year go to Lourdes. And in the 50s, after World War II, they started this international military pilgrimage, really as a gesture of reconciliation among warring armies. And so now, these many years later, you've got tens of thousands of people show up from over 24 countries. And the United States sends 500 people, and we were with this group of 40. And as you said, one has no legs, one is blinded, one African-American sniper from Kansas had a grenade go off in his mouth. And they have been treated, they have been healed in the conventional sense, and yet they still long for something, and they go on this journey. And for sure, there's a sort of huge degree of skepticism. You know, this guy Juan Roldan, a staff sergeant from the Army, whose patrol car was hit with a missile in Sadr City in Iraq, you know, he's sort of saying, you know, at one point you got to get naked to go into these baths, and there's volunteers who wrap you in sheets. And he's like, I'm a guy, I felt uncomfortable. You know, nothing about him was natural. And yet he's searching for something. I mean, it's almost like I could defy you, you know, to watch this and not tear up, because you realize that they need permission to release their emotions, and then there's also a kind of safety and comfort that comes in being in the community. And that's what you see in a lot of these pilgrimages and a lot of these shows that we're going to air on PBS, which is this sort of community of the traveler builds up along the way.
Yeah, that seemed to be a big part of this. You were talking about sort of where is God? Is God this kind of star in the middle of the stage for Johnny Carson to stand on, or is God diffused in a different way? And it seems as though that's one of the other questions about these pilgrimages is where is it you're really going, and is it the destination that you're going to, or is it the journey that you're on and the people that you're with? I mean, inevitably you're with a whole bunch of other people, and maybe if healing or enlightenment or whatever fix it is that you're looking for is located anywhere, it's located in the people around you as opposed to the destination you chose.
And we know from studies of contemporary religion in the United States that people who have 10 or more intimate friends, colleagues, neighbors in their religious institutions will have higher rates of participation. And we know that is one of the things that people communicate. Why? I mean, when I was working on Walking the Bible and I was out in the desert, this comes out so powerfully when you sort of look into the scriptural stories, right? You go in the desert. I spent a lot of time in the desert in my life in the last 20 years. You cannot survive alone. You might think you want to, but you cannot. You can only survive with the community around you. It's completely necessary. And that's what happens on these journeys, right? Again, it's difficult. You're not going to be able to survive by yourself. You need people to encourage you, to share stories with, to have conversations with. A lot of this is what the community creates. I think that's what will happen. I'm almost, again, prepared to guarantee you watch this series, you're going to have a meaningful conversation with those around you over the holidays. And that's really ultimately what is the primary cause of meaning. It's purpose, it's having a destination, and it's community. It's the conversation and the intimacy that you build with people. That's ultimately where the meaning comes from.
Well, let me ask you this, Bruce Feiler. As you have pointed out, this is not exactly your first rodeo in this regard. On the other hand, this is kind of a different thing that you were doing and a little bit more multi-pronged all at once. So how did it change you? Are you aware of ways in which this process and seeing these 6 fairly different kinds of pilgrimages altered you?
Well, when I was making Walking the Bible, I was in every scene, and I was the one effectively going through the emotional and intellectual transformation. And when we set out to do this, it became very clear I couldn't do that in all these different traditions, and so that's why we spent so much time finding the pilgrims. And I would say, it was, first of all, incredibly life-affirming, and I think that what the biggest change that I sort of encountered, besides seeing this, just the awesomeness of this spectacle of doing this in 1 year, which, of course, we can do now, it was 120,000 miles that I traveled because we live in the age of discount airfare, which makes travel so much easier. But I think that what I took away was sort of even more empowering to me that we live in this age of sort of DIY faith where we can make our own decisions and decide what we believe. And I think to see all these people doing that, it pushed me further to say, okay, it's okay that if I don't want to sort of follow every single tenet and rule of the tradition that I'm in. Half of Americans will change faith in the course of their lives. 4 in 10 Americans are in an interfaith marriage. And I'm the father, as you know, of 10-year-old daughters. And this allows me to say to them, hey, you don't have to do what I tell you. Don't just sit passively and accept this tradition that your parents are giving you. You decide for yourself. That's, to me, what this is ultimately about, right? A pilgrimage is, at its core, a gesture of action. It's saying, I'm going to get up off the couch and I'm going to decide what I believe myself. It's harder, but ultimately it can be more fulfilling.
Although there's an interesting paradox here. By the way, never say to your children, "You don't have to do what I tell you." That's a huge.
They're still 10, right? Maybe when they're 14, I'm going to regret that.
That's a giant strategic error. But and there's sort of an interesting paradox here too, because granting everything that you just said, which I think is all true, the other component of these journeys is something very ancient and very traditional. There's a yearning for connection to something considerably older than one's self. That's part of this.
Well, yes, I think that what we see in religion, right, is that people kind of break away from institutions because they're frustrated, because of scandal, because I just was reading in the paper today, the Archdiocese in New York City going to close another 88 churches, right? We live in this time where organized religion is condensing, and people sort of pull away and say, I don't need all that, right? I'll do it myself. And they quickly find that also is not going to work, right? So they tend to kind of regroup in communities and then sort of go out and seeking wisdom from ancient stories. So yes, I believe if you just sort of said, hey, who needs all of that? I'm going to decide for myself and make up my own morality. That's also, I think, a fool's errand. And that therefore the best way, the kind of equilibrium, is sort of a conversation, if you will, between contemporary life and these ancient stories, because there's a lot of wisdom in them, and also a dialogue, if you will, between contemporary life and these ancient paths, right? There's something about going on these places where tens of millions of people have walked before that allows you to get out of your own head and realize that just staring into our devices and clicking on the next clickbait and going after this sort of digital, ephemeral, virtual world that we're all seeking all the time, that's ultimately not going to answer some of the questions and needs that we have. So I completely agree that another thing appealing about a pilgrimage is it's the contemporary in dialogue with the past.
Perfectly said. Bruce Feiler, great to talk to you again. The premiere tomorrow night, CPTV, for Sacred Journeys with Bruce Feiler. Watch this series. We're going to end this segment with, and I don't usually introduce the song, but I know that we're going to get a lot of calls from people saying, what was that? That's great. So this is in honor of Lourdes and Bruce's journey there. It's a Leonard Cohen song called Song of Bernadette. You're hearing it sung by Jennifer Warnes.
There was a child named Bernadette. I heard the story long ago. She saw the Queen of Heaven once and kept the vision in her soul. No one believed what she had seen. No one believed what she heard. That there were sorrows to be healed. And mercy, mercy in this world. So many hearts I find broke like yours and mine, torn by what we've done and can't undo. I just wanna hold you. Come on, let me hold you like Bernadette would do.
All right, we officially live in an insane world when a Seth Rogen and James Franco comedy can actually, and we don't really know this to be absolutely the case yet, but it seems as though a soon-to-be-released Seth Rogen and James Franco comedy may have impelled the leader or the government or somebody connected with the government of North Korea to stage a massive cyber assault on the movie company that made it. So just that is proof that we have completely globally lost our minds. But with that, with the hack of Sony, has come a whole series of questions about how the press should use the information that's suddenly available through the hack. If you would like to read a very stupid and self-important essay about this, please go to the New York Times immediately and read what Aaron Sorkin has written. If you would like to read the smartest thing I've seen about it, you should read what Emily Yoshida, the entertainment editor for The Verge, wrote about it, which is why she's on today and not Aaron Sorkin. Not that he would have been on here anyway. So Emily Yoshida, you had to ask yourself a series of fairly penetrating questions about this, right? I mean, suddenly all this information is available, and some of it is stuff that The Verge would, and no legitimate press organization would ever use. People's social security numbers and I mean, just key pieces of that kind of data. Nobody's going to use it. There are some essentially pirated movies that are suddenly available, and then there's like all this other stuff that does fall somewhere within the rubric of news. Some of it's intra-studio gossip and emails people wish that they had not sent, which they had, but which are now available to be read, and some real information there. And you kind of, I sensed reading your piece, you almost surprised yourself by your reaction that a lot of this stuff is tainted fruit somehow.
Yeah, and I'm mostly surprised because I think I kind of am on the more conservative end in this dialogue as far as colleagues that I have, not at The Verge, but in general in the media. I think overall with a lot of newer media websites, there's sort of this understanding that once something's out there in the public domain, which obviously the Sony data was not supposed to be in the public domain, but now it is and can't really be put back in the box, and that there's this difference between in mentalities between I think a lot of the people especially people in power at Sony, where it's like, oh, we can clean this up and we can put it back away, and people who have been raised on the internet and have more importantly had their entire journalistic careers exist on the internet, where that's just not, we know that that's not possible. We know that once information is out there, it's pretty much fair game. And the question is what you do about that and whether or not it's really worth it, ethically, and also just in terms of traffic. I mean, let's be honest, most of these sites are trying to play a traffic game, and that's why, there's been so much talk about, for example, the Amy Pascal and Scott Rudin emails. That's just been such a driving story in all of this. So yeah, we're kind of in. I feel myself like I'm kind of in between this sort of older generations, kind of thinking about this in ethical terms, even though we could theoretically post whatever we wanted right now, and there's not really strong legal. It's still very murky legally what we can and can't do with that information.
So let me just sort of press a little bit on a few of the buttons here. So one question would be, all right, so this stuff is available. The toothpaste cannot be put back in the tube. Sony has hired David Boies to try to do that through legal action. But as you just said, anybody who grew up in the internet knows it's just not going to work. So some people would say, and maybe people in Verge said to you, well, so since the toothpaste is out of the tube, let's just treat all of it as news, anything that really might attract a viewership or readership. We're not in the business of holding back stuff that we know. So what was your answer to that? I mean, in some cases you decided exactly on that basis. But what's the counter argument?
Well, we're actually, and I think we were in a very strange place when all of this started happening, because I just started as the entertainment editor at The Verge pretty much a couple days after the first leak happened. It was, I think I started on the 24th or something. So I think the first leak happened on the 20th. So, and The Verge up until this point, I mean, they've done a lot of pop culture coverage, but my hire there was sort of the official beginning of them doing a concerted effort to cover the entertainment industry and pop culture and music, movies, all of that. So I was kind of still in the midst of drawing up what our actual approach to this kind of coverage was going to be. And then, of course, like the story just drops in the middle of it, and we have to kind of like, it's not just what would The Verge cover, it's like, because we don't even really have that set in stone yet. And what we believe is important to our audience and how we can best serve them.
But there seemed to be some part of you that you didn't want to do, as I think you said in the piece, the legwork for North Korea, which was engaging in a fairly openly hostile and anti-democratic act, right? I mean, they don't have a First Amendment in North Korea. They don't care about our First Amendment here, but they were basically saying to content creators, big scale content creators, we don't like the content you created. We are going to visit destruction and wrath upon you any way we can. You were uncomfortable being an instrument of that particular will.
Yeah, no, and I still feel that way. We still don't obviously know for sure whether or not this was North Korea, but I don't know of any other better theory at this point of who's behind this. So assuming that is the case, it just seems kind of hypocritical to me to benefit from a group of people who are trying to punish us for our exercising us as a country. I guess we didn't all vote on Sony releasing this Seth Rogen James Franco movie, but but it's still a part of our First Amendment that they can release that movie if they want to. And it just seems hypocritical to me to kind of, I guess, join in that punishment of that as the media itself, as the press. We wouldn't. I mean, some people that I follow and talk to about these sorts of issues have brought up the kind of hypothetical of, well, what if it was a media company? What if it was Vox Media, who I work for, that got leaked, that got all of their information dumped? And we would feel, I'm sure, much different about it, especially if it was coming from a group that was, in opposition to something we had written or some way that we had expressed ourselves. That would be seen as unacceptable. And I think that it's more of a generational thing than a kind of media thing, because I think there's a wide perception that, Sony, they have millions and billions of dollars, like they deserve this on some level. There's some idea that to kind of laugh and point as this giant company gets kind of brought to its knees.
Well, some of that's reinforced by the content itself, right? In other words, if you start seeing emails between two Sony executives talking like with just a level of middle school humor about the movies that they should allow President Obama to screen, and they're all movies about being black and being a slave, and with Kevin Hart, and I mean, it's, the cravenness of some of the emails tend to reinforce the notion that at some level justice is being visited upon this company. I mean, I don't know how different their emails ultimately are from anybody else's internal emails, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think, I have lived out in Los Angeles for a while. I just moved to New York, and I've worked here and there within the entertainment industry. And so for me, the language, the way, not that I've never worked for Scott Rudin or Amy Pascal, but the language and the kind of like chest beating, hyper aggressive, very dramatic language that's in a lot of these emails, and a lot of it is, of course, very misogynistic and racist. But that was less surprising to me, I guess. Not that it's okay at all, and we should definitely hold people who are in such influential positions accountable for this kind of thing. But the argument that it's okay to, like, one of the arguments is that, we're shedding light on how a very powerful corporation works and the people that are at the top of this corporation. And I would agree that that's useful to know. And I think, I think in another scenario, if this was leaked by, say, a disgruntled employee or something, I would have less of a problem with this stuff all being out there.
So that's an interesting question. In other words, you've decided that it does. I mean, some people would say it doesn't make any difference who broke the piñata. The candy's on the floor. And so whether it was Edward Snowden or Chelsea Manning or North Korea, the candy's on the floor. Some of it's really good candy. We should grab it and do with it what we do with candy. But for you anyway, it does make a difference who broke the piñata and how.
Yeah, absolutely. I think because, I've definitely been in a situation where I'm, reposting or re-reporting on stuff that's been gotten through, either a leak or, I think a really famous example was when the prototype for, I think, iPhone 4 or something was out. It was basically somebody left it at a bar and sent it into Gizmodo, and I think it was Gizmodo, and everybody kind of reported that story, and because it was it was an oops situation. It was an accident that happened that was at the expense of Apple, and that seemed less. It wasn't a punishment of Apple. In fact, you could almost see it as free publicity for Apple, even though they didn't see it that way.
They got through it somehow. Anyway, we know that they survived.
Yeah.
They were able to tough it out.
And I just think that it does matter in this situation. I think especially for long term, what you want to be able to say about the outlet that you work for, what your mission is, I guess, journalistically, to sound ultra Aaron Sorkin-y about it, that this stuff does matter, and I think that the majority of readers at Gawker or whatever other sites that have been following the story, I think the majority of them don't seem to care that much, which it's a generational thing, and I'm saying this as a 29-year-old.
Right. And I think what's important, Emily Yoshida, is that you brought this stuff up anyway. People may decide not to care about it one way or another, but you brought it up in a very thoughtful piece of writing on Verge. I do want to say, and we kind of buried this lead, but people can now go and read it, but one of the things Verge has decided, Emily and Verge have decided to cover, is that within those emails and within all that internal Sony information is a plan to bring the Stop Online Privacy Act back, but perhaps under more becoming or beguiling disguises. And so read about that in Verge. That's like a whole other conversation. If we started that, we'd burn the whole show up. But Emily Yoshida from The Verge, thanks so much for joining us today. And we're going to take a little break here. We'll come back. We have to have a final conversation. Well, we don't have to, but we want to have a final conversation about Newtown. The 2-year anniversary was yesterday. There's a lawsuit filed today. We'll tell you more about that when we return.
Oh boy! I'm gonna tweet and update your station. Ain't a thing you can do about it. You just got hacked. I know your password. I'm giving it out. I now have access to all your...
One reason I'm worried about the email hack is that I have a pretty high profile inside Sony Pictures in terms of having seen the Spider-Man sequel 21 times. And they sent me some emails to see if I was okay. Today's show was produced by Betsy Kaplan, Tucker Ives, and me, Kyone Wolf. Greg Hill appeared in the intro and tweets for us at WNPR Colin. Our intern is Jackie Filson. The part of Bill Curry was played by Andrew Garfield. Andrew Garfield. Katie Tolarski is our executive producer. For show pages, articles, and screenshots of the Faith Middleton Show staff's emails to Channing Tatum, visit our website, WNPR.org. On tomorrow's show, a conversation about religion with Thomas More. Now, back to Colin.
All right. Yesterday was the second anniversary of the shooting at Newtown, and this will be an anniversary that just stays with us in Connecticut for as long as there are people alive who remember it, and probably beyond that. But with each passing year, probably the way in which we think about it mutates and changes, and there are new developments. So joining us is Monty Frank. He's an attorney from Newtown, leader of Team 26, and on the board of Sandy Hook Promise. Maybe we could just begin with that conversation. Newtown, as a community, has had to really think about and maybe feel about how to observe these anniversaries. This is the second one. It's not as though everybody can speak about this with one voice, but was there kind of a sense of the town and how people wanted to spend that day?
It's different for every person. I know my wife and I reacted differently to the healing process following the shootings in our town, where our daughter went to school. And I think if you asked each of the 27,000 residents in Newtown, you'd probably get a different reaction. I do think that, we all are grieving, and there's a universal feeling of sadness dealing with yesterday. It's unavoidable. As you drive around town, you see purple balloons, you drive by the school, you drive by the firehouse, and these constant reminders are just hard to it's hard to let go. We will never forget. We're moving onward and trying to make a difference in the world.
So part of that moving onward and trying to make a difference in the world has been trying to get actual tangible, palpable results out there in the world about the way in which guns are sold or made available in this country, about the just general status of firearms in this country. You were part of a press conference today and in the late morning that involved several political leaders and several community people from Newtown, including some of the families themselves. And rather than take you through all those things, I mean, when you say moving forward and trying to change things, that's part of what you're talking about, right? Trying to change maybe the laws in this country or the understanding about the role guns play.
It's multifaceted. It's changing the laws, and we've had some successes. It's changing the culture, the way that we feel about gun violence, and it's also working on the mental health aspect, getting into the communities, trying to recognize and, when there are people at risk and trying to provide the resources so that it doesn't become a problem for others.
One of the things that's been announced today, and I don't know how closely involved you are of it, but is a planned lawsuit against Bushmaster, the maker of the firearm itself, and the gun shop where it was bought. There's a long history of trying to sue gun makers and mixed success and changes in the possibilities of it since 2004, 2005, when Congress actually passed a law that protected gun manufacturers from a lot of kinds of lawsuits. Is there anything you can say about this particular lawsuit, either the nature of it or what the groups in Newtown expect to see from it?
I haven't read the complaint that I understand has been filed, or at least has been served. I will read it in the coming days, but it's part of what we're trying to accomplish. When I say that, for too long the NRA has had way too much of an influence on Congress, and the fact that there is some sort of immunity provided to the gun manufacturers that is not provided to almost any other manufacturer of any other product is a problem, and it's part of the grassroots movement that we're building so we can try to reverse the influence the NRA has had. And I think we've seen some successes in doing that, and I think we're going to see a lot more successes in the future. Yeah,
and just to make that clear, it's the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, the PLCAA, it's usually called. This was the law passed in Congress, I think in 2004, signed in 2005, very much spurred on by the NRA and by friendly members in Congress, and it really does create this very unusual status, as you say. If there were a toaster that was as dangerous to the consumers who owned it as a gun is, you wouldn't be allowed to sell that toaster. But guns do occupy a different status and have some constitutional protection. But, this is a very fraught climate, and you do have a new Congress coming in, and obviously people from Newtown have gone down to Washington, and it's easy to say there have been some successes, particularly here in Connecticut, and some failures. I would assume with a new Congress and a new Congress with more Republicans in it, not that Republicans speak with one voice about this, but they're characteristically a little less friendly towards anything resembling gun control than Democrats might be. Does that pose an additional set of challenges?
I don't think so. When I hear Senator Blumenthal, Senator Murphy, Congresswoman Esty speak so passionately and such resolve about trying to get things done and talk about areas where there is some commonality and there is an opportunity to get some things done. There's a mental health initiative. There's a school safety initiative. I believe that background checks, that we will close the loophole. 91% of Americans still favor a stronger background check law. And that's includes a large percentage of gun owners. We're not looking to infringe upon the rights of gun owners. We are looking to place into law, as we did in Connecticut, as was done in Colorado and Delaware and New Jersey and Washington State, things that will decrease the likelihood of another mass shooting and decrease the amount of gun violence that plagues our inner cities. on a daily basis.
And I think what you're saying is very important, that there's sort of been a balanced message out of Newtown. If Newtown simply turned into this pocket of intense gun control advocacy and sort of nothing else, that probably wouldn't be true to the spirit of how everybody wants this terrible thing to be remembered. And it would sort of identify Newtown in a very monochromatic way. As you're saying, the pushes have come in a lot of different areas, including mental health. And I also have not read the 40-page complaint in this lawsuit, although my understanding of it, it raises an interesting question. So it is increasingly hard to sue gun manufacturers. And so there's this argument that's made called negligent entrustment. And so the notion basically is, and it kind of gets back to what we were talking about before, that in America, because of the Second Amendment, there's sort of a lot of people who think, well, we'll sell guns to people who qualify. Maybe they'll pass a background check if there's one in place there, whatever. And that's it. This is a free country. People buy guns. We don't always know what's going to happen to them. And obviously, occasionally there's a tragedy, but that's the price of freedom. I mean, that's sort of a counter-argument that gets made. And so this lawsuit will, I think, be asking a fundamental question, which is, Nancy Lanza was a qualified gun purchaser. It wasn't as though they sold to somebody who wasn't a qualified gun purchaser. So is that enough? I mean, it's a philosophical question, I think. Is it enough to make guns and sell those guns to gun dealerships, and for gun dealerships to do a reasonably good job of selling guns and trying not to sell guns to hideously unqualified people? Or is there another question there? Is there a fundamental philosophical question do we have to ask ourselves, that has something to do with, well, these are really, really dangerous things, and they can very easily pass from the hands of Nancy Lanza to an Adam Lanza, and at which point the picture changes drastically. So is it enough just to have some good background checks to tweak the laws, or is there a bigger question the country has to ask itself?
I think there's a bigger question that the country has to ask itself, because it's I think the change in the laws will certainly promote some additional safety that people can feel. Mm-hmm. But I think there needs to be a larger discussion about mental health, about responsible gun ownership, about hunters' rights, because nothing that we are looking to do restricts the rights of hunters. But, of course, hunters aren't using high-capacity magazines. Mm-hmm. Do we need to have 30-round magazines? What purpose does that serve? Why not limit it at 10 rounds like Connecticut has? Do we want to get more involved in communities like Sandy Hook Promises promoting, to go into the communities on a grassroots basis and give communities a toolbox as to how to recognize people at risk who may need additional help, so that we can avoid having issues like we had in Sandy Hook and elsewhere. I think this is a part of a conversation. But, just to reiterate, what this conversation is not about, it's not about taking people's guns away. Mm-hmm. It's not about doing away with the Second Amendment. It's actually about implementing what the Supreme Court has said the Second Amendment says, that reasonable restrictions are appropriate in order to ensure the public safety and the public good, and to prevent massacres at the level we're seeing. Right now, there have been 94 school shootings since Newtown. 30,000 Americans die every single year because of gun violence. That has to change. That can't be acceptable in a first world nation like ours.
Monty Frank, I'm running out of time, and I'm about to ask you a 4-minute question, which you're only going to have about 30 seconds to answer. But I assume that Newtown will never be like other towns, that for as long as you live there, there'll be an awareness of what happened there, and that's an incredibly sad thing and a terrible burden. But I sense also for Newtown, there's a sense that it's a town with a purpose. And as horrible as the tragedy is, there is that little mixed aspect of it, that you're living for a reason.
There's no question about that. Newtown could have turned inward and become a little island to itself. Instead, I'm so proud of our community because we have lent our voice. We had this massive infusion of media and attention to our town, and we've lent our voice to others, and we've created a movement. We've joined forces with Hartford and Bridgeport and Harlem and Chicago, and really unified America on this movement to try to make our our schools safer and our communities safer for the betterment, I think, of the country.
Thanks so much for spending time with us, Monty Frank, an attorney from Newtown, leader of Team 26 and on the board of Sandy Hook Promise. We'll be back tomorrow with a conversation with Thomas More. It's one we had a few months ago. It's about making a religion of your own.